All right, welcome back everybody to another Form Check Friday. For anybody who's just tuning in for the first time, what we do here is you email us your lifting videos, I put them up on the screen behind me, and I offer technique advice. So I try to help people become better lifters by either altering their technique or giving training advice as it pertains to programming, in some cases talking a little bit about injury and some of that kind of stuff. It all kind of depends on what's submitted. And if you'd like to submit, if you'd like to send something in for Form Check Friday, go ahead and check the link in the description box below, or just head to calgarybarbell.com and click on the little FCF. There's a submission form there. Real quick, if you do decide to submit, give me that context. Let me know what's going on in your lifting. Let me know what you think about your lifting. Let me know what you think are the issues. That helps feed me information so that I can direct my criticisms and my critiques and help answer your questions. Anyways, before we get started on the video, I want to show you something really quickly. Now, this may or may not be legal according to the Book of Dylan, but I put these just right in reach here. We have some new apparel coming out on November 18th. It's kind of hard to see on film. This probably doesn't do it very much justice, but we got this beautiful black on black hoodie with embroidery on the front. The OG Calgary Barbell Gorilla logo on the back. Sew on patch. Little clip tag. You know how we do it at CBB. We also have the classic logo shirts. Now I know people have been asking for these for a while, and we have them. November 18th, we're going to be launching the black ones. We've got sort of aqua blue color shirt. We have an army green color shirt. We're going to be re-releasing our toques if your head's getting warm or cold, if you want your head warm, anyways, we don't really do much in terms of paid sponsorships. We don't have magic spoons or forks or knives. We don't have underwear that we're trying to sell you. We don't have landscaping for your balls. Like we're not trying to do that, So if you want to, go ahead and support us. Picking up some apparel goes a long ways, and hopefully y'all like it and think it's dope. So anyways, without any further ado, we're gonna pick up where we left off last week with Batu, and he's doing some squats here. So now we left off last week with Batu's squat. We had some fantastic comments in the comment section letting us know what they thought Batu should do in terms of optimizing his squat. Let me give you a little bit of context really quickly. So 24 years old, 98 kilos, competing in Turkish nationals in the 105 category. So going up, which I think is usually good. We talk about caloric surplus, we talk about gains when it comes to your lifts and your total. Now this is his top set of the day, and he calls this a sort of weightlifting style ass to grass squat. He said he tried low bar but had a really big sticking point, but squat also seems to be his weakest lift, the one that he struggles with most. So just taking a look at this really quickly, I'm gonna say that it's probably worth some investment. Even if low bar feels a little weird at first, it's probably worth putting some time into trying to develop. You've got a long-ish torso, and if your femurs were maybe a little shorter, you'd be able to ride out the the high bar advantage, but you got pretty long femurs too. So what's happening here is as you hit the bottom, everything's popping forward a little bit. Because this lever is so long, as soon as it tilts, as soon as it's not super upright anymore, it takes a lot of force from the hips to be able to extend. Watch when they come up behind you like this, right? That bar comes out here. We start to lose the upper back. You want to talk about a sticking point? This is definitely a sticking point. So if we want to maintain good tension, one of the things we're probably going to need to do is to work on that depth and get it just so. Now this goes for high bar, low bar, whatever you decide to do. I would work on cutting your depth, right? This is absolutely depth. This is unquestionably depth. This is 3 white lights. Anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together is going to look at this and say, that's depth, white light. Now, when you go that deep, really all you're doing is losing a lot of tension, losing a lot of positional advantage. and shifting the weight around on your feet quite a bit. So we're ending up kind of coming out of position, and then we have this really kind of janky mid portion of the lift where we're trying to put the pieces back together. We're trying to get tight and braced again, but we can't, or at least it slows us down to do so. Sorry, is maybe a better way of putting it. But because we bounce so much in the bottom, because we go completely loose and completely to the end range of motion, we are losing a lot of tension. So one of the things that I'm seeing is kind of hard to tell here, is that, yeah, we rock pretty hard onto the forefoot, onto the front of the foot. Generally speaking, throughout the squat, we want to try to stay mostly balanced on the feet. We want to have even pressure through the front of the foot and the back of the foot. And we don't really want to be rocking forward or having that weight shift a whole lot. And you can see right there as your ankle goes this way, right? As your shin, the lower limb of your leg pops forward. That's really going to throw you off. That's really sort of, see the heel coming up there, right? There's a lot that kind of goes into what I'm seeing here. And the big thing is that depth. It is how deep we're going. Potentially we'd be more comfortable in a wider stance. Sometimes with a wider stance, it kind of like binds the hips up, or the hip anatomy kind of reaches its end range a little sooner, right? It depends on how your hips are built. Some people are going to squat way too deep narrow. Some people are going to squat deeper wider. But I would recommend playing around with a wider stance to see if that helps you find a more natural stopping point in the bottom of your squat that doesn't involve completely just slamming into the bottom. You can see how much we kind of like the elbows wiggle there, the back, the hips are moving around. You know, there's a lot of extraneous movement that we maybe don't really want throughout the squat that's happening because of how hard we hit the bottom. Now, I would love to see your low bar squat, right? And I think there's probably some work that could be done to that in order to help bring it up to par. But I would absolutely recommend doing some low bar squatting, investing some time, trying to get past that awkward learning phase, and I think you're probably going to get a lot out of it. So hopefully that helps you, Batu. Good luck at Turkish Nationals. All right, so moving on to our next video here. This video is of a lifter named Shadel, and this was sent in by her father and coach Daniel. So Shadel is 15, and this was a 140 kilo pull in the under 57 kilo category. Now, I almost just want to stop and pause for a second and point out how impressive that is and how awesome that is, and great work to both of you, specifically to Shadel for such an awesome deadlift at such a young age. You know, I often tell people if they're starting lifting when they're, 18, 19, 20, 15 in this case, look at what I've been able to accomplish as a lifter, and I didn't start till I was 23. Like, what I was lifting when I was 15? Nothing. Zero. So I think that's great. I think it's impressive. I think it's wonderful in terms of, doing some cool stuff and getting into, being physical and being active when you're young. I think that's great. So anyways, moving on. Coach Dad sent the email and was asking, okay, so thoughts on being quick off the floor. So he pointed out that we have this kind of like a little bit of a jerky motion. I can see it here. We don't necessarily pull the slack out super well when we're initiating the lift like that, right? So he's not sure. He says it usually results in her being pretty quick off the floor, maybe a little bit slower at lockout. And the other question was, would she benefit from a belt? Obviously, being a smaller lifter, sometimes those big, 13 millimeter, really thick belts that are, often very tall as well, can just kind of get in the way more than anything. So we'll talk about that as well. But first I want to talk about pulling the slack out of the bar. Now, we've made a few different videos on the channel about how to pull the slack out of the bar. I think the big thing that I would try to get Shadel to do here is she gets into this really good position, and obviously super strong, but I would maybe narrow the grip a little bit, because anytime we look at the lifter's shoulders, we usually want to see pretty much a straight up and down angle from the arms. Now, those are obviously terrible drawings, but you get my point, right? And what we can see here on Shadel is that her grip kind of goes outwards from her shoulders. What that does is it creates a little bit of extra range of motion, you know, potentially forcing us to get closer to the bar before we can reach the bar. Now, if we're a little narrower gripped, then in theory, the shoulders can be slightly further from the bar while we get into that bottom position. And that's going to make what I'm going to talk about next a little bit easier. So we see this kind of, you know, it takes a second for the bar to get going, for her to find tightness and tension against it, and for that bar to break inertia off the floor, right? There's even like a little wiggle in the legs and wiggle in the hips kind of thing. Right there. Now, the way that I would recommend to pull the slack out of the bar, and if you're not familiar with pulling the slack out of the bar, basically what it means is reducing any looseness in the chain, right? So if we're not actually already kind of pushing and pulling on this bar in the bottom position, and then we start it very suddenly, that's what we're going to end up with, is that little bit of sort of like wiggling off the floor. And sometimes that can lead to inconsistencies in the lift. And I think that's maybe the biggest concern, is just that there's going to be lifts that go a little bit better or a little bit worse based on how we organize and tighten everything, because it's happening so fast. It's going to be slightly different from time to time. And generally what I'm recommending is that we take charge of how things tighten, and we are more conscious of our bracing by tightening things ahead of time, making sure that we have pressure in the right spots when we start the lift. So what I'd probably recommend Shadell do is try to just bring her hips up behind her. And again, we've talked about this in a few different videos. Just, you know, look on our channel for deadlift start position, pulling the slack out, all that kind of stuff. Plenty of resources there. But I would recommend lift your hips up here, Shadell, and you're going to find some tension in your hamstrings to start with. And then I want you to kind of lean maybe a little bit back onto your heel. That's going to help you find some tension in your hips. And then I want you to try to keep that tension present. And as you pull your hips down to the bar, start pushing the floor away. And this sounds like a whole bunch of steps. It sounds really complicated, but I promise you, once it kind of clicks, once you've practiced it a few times, it's going to start making way more sense. So from this point, we push the hips up, we find that hip and hamstring tension, then we start pushing the floor away as we pull the hips down into position. And then the last thing we tighten is the upper back, and we try to find that tension in the lats and pull it down and connect it into the hips, right? And we don't necessarily need to be thinking about trying to like extend your back or chest out or anything like that. I think that's an overused cue, often not that helpful. But what we are trying to do is, you know, in theory and in practice, create some connection between the shoulders and the hips. You know, the shoulders and the lower body, maybe even is a better way of saying it, right? So we want to connect the shoulders down into the lower body, and we do this by trying to imagine that we're pulling our shoulder blades all the way down into your hips, right? So that's going to help tighten the lats. We're going to take a nice big breath into the trunk, into the abs, right? We're going to clamp that down, and that's where the belt comes into play. Now, if we are not comfortable with the belt, honestly, I think that's fine. I've coached high-level lifters, and I mean IPF Worlds medalist lifters, who don't choose to wear a belt because it inhibits their ability to get into a good position. Generally speaking, if we can find a bit of a less intrusive belt, something that's more comfortable, maybe a little bit more flexible, then I would go that route and do something like that. Try that out. The other thing is, I think that you're going to find, if you go through those steps that I mentioned to try to set your tension up and set yourself into position before you get it, you know, before you get your hips down there, I think wearing a belt is going to make a lot more sense, because you'll be able to kind of orient yourself in such a way that the belt is mostly comfortable. You find your position before bringing the hips down, right? Then when we bring the hips down, like I was talking about, we're going to have sort of more of a like momentary discomfort, but it's going to be all kinds of pressure and getting ready to lift and everything. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on all that, my thoughts on all those things. And you know, another thing, Shadell, just keep it up as long as you enjoy it, right? There's a lot of literature about early specialization, so I would say, yeah, I don't know, I'm trying not to overstep here, Coach Dad, but do lots of varied things. Try not to get too wrapped up in one thing. Do lots of varied activities, varied physical endeavors, have fun, you know, incorporate play into all of the things. And honestly, this goes for adults too. But yeah, do a lot of varied things and you'll be healthier and last longer and be stronger in the long run. So anyways, enjoy the ride. I think it's sick that you're deadlifting that much weight at 15, and congrats again. All right, moving on. Our next lifter here is Alex. Now, Alex is a 55-year-old trainee from Edmonton. Shout outs to Team Berta, baby. Now this is Alex's PR squat. So this is a single, this is very high effort, 365 pounds. Again, super impressive, you know, kind of opposite end of the spectrum, you know, 55-year-old guy doing some heavy squats. You know what? I also love to see that. So thanks for sending this in, man. Now, he said he thinks it's the depth, but he's wanting, you know, any kind of critique that I might have in terms of, is he getting to depth? As well as any other, you know, advice to help him prepare for a meet. He's got a meet coming up in January, his first competition, Masters 2 lifter. Let's get into it. So the first question here was depth. So we're going to take a really, you know, close look and see if we're at depth. Let me see if I can get like a good crop that's going to show it for us here. Okay. So what we're looking for when it comes to squat depth is we're looking for the top of the knee, right? And the crease of the hip. So I would say that this, again, to me, is absolutely, undeniably to depth. Now, unfortunately, there's a little bit of ambiguity in the wording because they use the top of the knee joint instead of talking about like the top surface, whatever. Anyways, so I usually go off of kind of the top corner of the quad here, and the crease of the hip being the sort of lowest point where everything bunches up. So I would say that is absolutely to depth. I think that you're 100% good. I think if judges see that from the side and from the front, they're going to say there are your white lights. Now let's get back into, oops, circle back around to a good crop. There we go. Okay, so he's also wondering about any other advice in terms of his competition in January, and I'm just going to let this play for a sec, but I want to send anybody who's looking for, you know, a resource for their first competition to check out the So You Want to Be a Powerlifter playlist on our YouTube page. We're also looking to redo that soon. I think we want to refilm some of that stuff, update it with some of the new rules, you know, give a little bit more of my experience. You know, I've been competing for another 4 or 5 years since then, so we'll try to layer on some more stuff. We'll up the production quality, and we're going to release a So You Want to Be a Powerlifter Part 2. Anyways, check that series out. It's got everything from, you know, the last little bit of programming leading into the meet, to what to bring in your gym bag, to what to expect on the day, to scoring and weigh-ins and all that kind of stuff. It's in there. It's great. I was really happy that we did that, and I think it's helped a lot of people. So anyways, check that out. If we want to get into the sort of specifics of your squat a little bit more here, I think one of the things that I'm gonna try to get you to do over time here, and you might be able to incorporate this right away and feel it and feel good. This might be something that feels a little foreign, might take some practice, might take some load reduction in order to make it, you know, kind of less awkward, but we're ending up in a little bit of what I would consider a slightly overextended position as we get into the bottom. And then we try to, you know, regain that extension as we come out of the bottom. Now, this was a really common thing for a long time, but the cue of chest up, and again, you know, I often shout him out on the channel, but David Wilson has a fantastic video on this. The cue of chest up, I think, is often overused, and these days I would say probably less applicable, you know, and in most cases is going to be more harm than good kind of thing. And I mean harm in terms of technical efficiency. Your body is not threatened. You're not going to get hurt. It's good. So what we're seeing here is, like I said, this little bit of extension here. And a lot of the times when we have this extension on the way down, that's our sort of comfort point. That's where we want to be. That's where we feel tight because we're used to it in this overextension. So we go into the bottom, and you'll notice you'll notice Alex's back kind of goes into a little bit more of a neutral range position right as he hits depth here. Right there. You see that? You see how his low back kind of just flattens out? A lot of people are going to look at that and be like, oh my God, butt work, butt work. It is movement, right? But I wouldn't consider that the dreaded butt wink. Instead, I think that's your body going to a more neutral range position because that's what's necessary for your hips in order to get to depth. And I would also argue that this more neutral range position is probably going to be a stronger position to push from should we maintain it. What happens here on the way up is we try to go back into this extension, and when we try to refine extension on the way up in a squat, we often run into these really exaggerated sticking points. And when we run into these really exaggerated sticking points, I think that the best way to not have that happen is to work on the bracing, right? So that we have a more neutral range position going into the bottom, and then we maintain a more neutral range position coming out of the bottom, and things are a little smoother. Now, the other aspect of this obviously is going to be that this was 1 at 10. This was a max effort lift. This was a PR. Also, I don't know if I said congrats, but congrats on the PR. We always congratulate PRs here. But I think, yeah, anyways, long story short, I think the bracing is going to be a big thing. We've talked a lot about bracing on the channel. We have a pretty decent walkthrough on bracing when it comes to the squat in our definitive guide to squat on the channel. If you want a really quick primer, I can kind of talk you through it right now. Basically, what we're looking for is to try to maintain the sort of cylindrical nature and pressure of the trunk. So what I mean by that is that this is our rib cage here, right? This is going to be our pelvis. That's my terrible illustration. Anyways, that's our rib cage. This is obviously your belt and your abdominal area. Anyways, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the ribs clamped down in order to create pressure through here so that we have sort of connection this way, right? Imagine like the piston in a car cylinder or an engine cylinder, just kind of pushing down and creating that pressure. I like to think of that. I know nothing about cars. Maybe this is a terrible analogy, but I like to think of that kind of as a reference when talking about how we're trying to create the pressure to connect these two aspects of your trunk. And that's really what bracing is all about, right? We try to pull the ribs down in the front. We try to maybe pull the shoulder blades down in the back, or at least find some kind of tightness. It might be more accurate to think kind of along your side, pulling the shoulder blades down as opposed to along the back, because a lot of times pulling your shoulder blades down in the back is just going to push you into that extension again. So, but basically that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to clamp everything down, and then once it's clamped down at its tightest, we're trying to breathe into that space, out through the abdomen. A lot of people reference breathe 360 degrees, and that one kind of never really made a whole lot of sense to me, but it does make sense in that you're trying to breathe outwards through your abs, through your belly, through the front, and through the sides and the obliques. You're trying to kind of fill everything out in that space, and that's where, again, the belt comes into play, right? We're pushing out against that belt with air pressure. The belt is containing it. So what that does is it creates IAP, or intra-abdominal pressure, which is more and more pressure in that trunk, in that torso, to help us brace. So there's my quick little bracing primer. But work on your bracing. Your depth is great, and good luck at your meet, Alex. All right, our next lifter here is Lee. Lee's doing bench press, obviously. Lee's 37 years old, been training about 10 years, mostly with a powerlifting focus, a little bit on and off. He says he started back up, getting back into lifting in about the spring this year. And he says that bench has always been his problem child lift, his problematic lift. He's tried a lot of tips and cues. He's worked with personal trainers. He's asked his buddies who lift, and hasn't really, had the pieces come together for him before. So he's also mentioned specifically leg drive being an issue, having troubles keeping it consistent, and mentioning that sometimes his butt comes up off the bench, So what I want is for all of you wonderful people who are obviously, still watching this video right to the bitter end because you love us, you love what we do, you love Form Check Friday, what's not to love? Go down into the comments section below. Let Lee know what you think that he can do to improve his bench. And I'm going to come back, and next week's Form Check Friday is going to start with Lee. It's going to start up with Lee. I'm going to give my 2 cents, and you can either be validated or mad that I didn't say what you thought I should say. That's it. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Make sure you check out that new apparel. It's going to be coming out on the 18th. And we love you all very much. Like and subscribe, all that, whatever. Have a good one. Have a nice weekend. Be safe. Bye.